Good evening. First of all, thank you for being here this evening. It's good to see the familiar faces at these GOGA events and also the new ones. Members of the private sector, members of the public sector, special invited guests, the media, good evening once again. Welcome to the 6th public lecture, which is being hosted by the Guyana Oil and Gas Association. And this lecture is being delivered by Dr. Roger Hussein, Coordinator of the Trade and Economic Development Unit, Economics Department, University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. I must first state that Dr. Hussein is one of my lecturers at UG, so I've known him for quite a number of years. I hope after his lecture he doesn't ask me any questions. The theme of the public lecture this evening is corporate social responsibility in small oil producing states. Corporate social responsibility has emerged as an important approach for addressing the social and environmental impact of companies' activities. Yet companies are increasingly expected to go beyond this. They are now expected to assist in addressing many of the world's most progressing problems, including climate change and poverty. With increasing expectations placed on businesses, we must ask if CSR is capable of delivering on these larger issues based on evidence from the oil and gas sector. Looking at companies from developed countries, such as ExxonMobil, which is now established in Guyana, as well as companies from emerging economies, such as Brazil's Petrobras, our neighbor next door, we must investigate the potential of CSR for addressing 3 important challenges to the business-society relationships, which are the environment, the development of the economy, and the governance of the economy. While the role of business in society seems to have been changing for some time, there is no agreement among observers on what CSR stands for or where the boundary of CSR lies. Different people have interpreted CSR differently. For example, CSR means different things to practitioners seeking to implement CSR inside companies than it does to researchers trying to establish CSR as a discipline. It can also mean something different to civil society groups than it does to private sector. The responsibilities of companies in developing nations, such as Guyana, are also defined differently depending on the social, especially the national context. However, the nature of an industry determines CSR concerns, and the social concerns are highly diversified between the various industries in an economy. Therefore, the oil and gas sector has been among the leading industries in championing CSR across the world. The growing importance of corporate social responsibility in today's competitive business climate is well known. CSR is practically important for firms and sectors characterized by their close ties with the social and environmental context, especially multinational enterprises operating in resource-rich developing countries such as Guyana, and more specifically in the oil and gas sector. Numerous questions surround the extent to which oil in these multinational enterprises really contribute through CSR activities to sustainable development in countries such as Guyana. The results illustrate the potential of CSR when integrated into the multinational enterprises such as the large oil and gas companies, their business strategies, to improve the social and economic and environmental situations of countries such as Guyana, due not only to the impact on the company's immediate surroundings, but on the wider legislative, administrative, and entrepreneurial context. Modern CSR programs reflect the recognition that business, including the energy business, does not happen in a social vacuum. Today's oil and gas companies work within an ever broader and more complex set of social institution norms and expectations that exist alongside market factors, but which are created and shaped in other ways. Therefore, the term corporate social responsibility refers to the kinds of things companies do in their efforts to navigate these swirls currents of changing expectations. Expectations that have never loomed larger in the daily lives of companies, including oil and gas companies. CSR is more popular than ever in the business world, and we will see in our country CSR will become ever more important as our economy evolves towards the emerging oil and gas sector. A company's pursuit of its self-interest does not provide social benefits. This is the essence of Adam Smith's invisible hand. Efficient firms provide business benefits not only to shareholders, which are the returns on investments, but also employees, which are the returns on your wages earned, or the suppliers, which are your revenues garnered, or customers, which are the better products at lower prices, and local communities, which are the jobs created, the economic growth that is provided over long term, and the revenues from taxes that are given to government, all of which increase those stakeholders' utility. Those stakeholders, in turn, spend or donate money, increasing others' utility, and so on. However, CSR implies more than the operation of the invisible hand. It's linked to the idea that companies owe duties to their external shareholders beyond those enshrined in the laws of the countries in which they are operating. The word responsibility implies a duty to someone or something. The use of the word social, also a modifier, implies that the companies owes duty to society at large. Ladies and gentlemen, with those initial introduction to the term corporate social responsibility and understanding it in the context of the oil and gas sector, I will now allow our guest speaker, Professor Roger Hussain, to make his presentation on corporate social responsibility in small oil producing states. Thank you.
Good evening, all protocol observed. Today I will be speaking on CSR, corporate social responsibility, in the context of a strategy to help mitigate some of the impact of the resource curse. And, I like to start these conversations by making a quotation that I find very applicable to many oil-based economies that produce oil. It is from a French philosopher. It was said in 1564, someone by the name of Jean Baudin, and he said that men of a fat and fertile soil are most often effeminate and coward, whereas contrariwise, men of a barren soil are by nature vigilant and industrious. Now, to me, that is a very powerful statement and is very applicable to many resource-abundant economies. It sets the template for why people and economies with a lot of resources tend to make an abundance of mistakes. If one were to look at some of the most oil-rich economies in the world, you would see that they rank very poorly on the governance indicators and in terms of per capita GDP growth. It is not something to take lightly. I will make a lot of reference to the Trinidad and Tobago economy as a case study. I know it well. Between 1999, for example, and 2016, Trinidad and Tobago generated around $90 billion in economic rents. Economic rents is defined as the difference between the actual price of a commodity minus the lifting cost times production. And if we were to sum this for both oil and gas, in that time period, we would come up with about $90 billion, of which about $5 billion exists in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund of the Trinidad and Tobago economy, and about $8 billion as stock of international reserve. That is 13 from the 90. And that leaves 77 unaccounted for. That 77, I think, was just squandered and wasted. It was poorly spent. We changed the intercept of economic activity in Trinidad and Tobago, but we did not change the growth of economic activity in Trinidad and Tobago. And I say this all the time, and I use statistics to support it. And so, the Trinidad and Tobago economy today in 2017 has not grown since 2007. In fact, we had negative economic growth of minus 0.51% from 2007 to the present. And it is because, in part, we took things easy after a while. Now, I love cricket, and I also like athletics. And part of the reason I could be wrong, I think Bolt did not take the last 100 meters he ran very seriously. I could be wrong. I follow him. I like to see when he is going to parties and playing music and whatnot. And I think he didn't take it as seriously as he should. because we all know if he took it seriously, he would have won. Injury is something you cannot predict, but perhaps if you prepare amply, you could avoid it. But I think part of the reason is because he has achieved so much and he is so talented that he perhaps relaxed at the last moment and didn't taper off his 28-run victory with a 29th victory. But I suspect we would see him again in a couple of years' time and he would make amends. This is him here, back in 2009 at the IAF World Championships in London when he clocked 9.58 in 100 meters. And this is him here just recently when he pulled up in the relay of the 100 meters at the same IAF tournament. So here we are seeing one factor of production with certainly an abundance of capability having two different outputs for a number of reasons. One of the reasons I mentioned could be competitiveness. He had perhaps decreased in his competitiveness drive in 2017 as compared to 2009. Another factor could be some of the other entities that enter the race. Jocelyn Gatlin certainly have to be given a lot of credit for persisting over time after coming back from two doping ban. And so the same factor of production in different environments could yield different results, and it's something that Guyana would want to keep very closely in mind. In a volatile environment characterized by fluctuating prices, in June 17, 2008, the price of crude oil was $147 a barrel. The following year, in March 2009, it had plunged to $34 a barrel. So things change and can change very quickly in that market. And the cobweb cycle, in which supply today is a function of demand yesterday, has made a mockery of oil prices in the last few years. And indeed, the USA is now poised as the largest producer of crude oil in the world. And it is highly unlikely, in my view, that crude oil prices in the medium-term period would rise above $60 a barrel, barring some tremendous exogenous shock. And so, new producers, especially in deep water, where it is expensive, have to be careful about having overzealous expectations about resource inflow, because it is very costly to produce crude oil from those type of environments. And so the margins of profitability will not be as high as on land producers, and it's something that we have to keep in mind. So this is the example we're using both here. This here simply shows the same thing in a different form. It shows that over time comparative advantage changes, so that an economy with one state of comparative advantage today may be in the future having a different level of comparative advantage. So that both for the period 2007 to 2017, well, most of 2017 up until now, dominated the 100, the 200, 4x100 races. He was really a tremendous blessing to the generation that behold him. But it has since changed. And similarly, with economies, your comparative advantage evolves over time, and you become weaker in some areas and you can become even stronger in other areas. And it's something to observe. Now, it is very good if an economy becomes stronger at the areas in which they can produce well. If an economy becomes stronger in areas in which it can produce well, that is healthy for an economy. It means it is now a dominant player. But if in so doing, in becoming a stronger player in areas which it can produce well, it exposes the economy to a greater amount of vulnerability from external shocks. That is something that the economy has to watch very closely. Now, take the Trinidad and Tobago economy here, for example. The word RCA here refers to reveal comparative advantage, and a value below 1 simply means you are not very strong at selling something. A value above 1 means you are relatively strong. I divided the range above 1 into several categories. Between 1 and 2 means, okay, you are strong, but you are not very, very strong. A value between 2 and 4 means you are moderately strong, and a value above 4 means you are extremely strong. So we see out of, we had 248 categories, and the number of categories that were weak between 0 and 1 increased from 214 to 228 in the golden era of LNG and natural gas in Trinidad and Tobago. In the golden era, this was the best period in Trinidad and Tobago economic history since Columbus came. And in that golden era, we saw that the number of areas in which we were weak increased. We saw that those productive sectors in the category 1 to 2 decreased from 12 to 6. So here it is, we had some fledgling export sectors. They maintained some degree of comparative advantage with the rest of the world, but in the presence of a rapid inflow of energy revenues, they became weaker. So they moved from 12 to 6 in that category. Even more in the category 2 to 4, we see now that this is moderately strong. You know, so this is like a 17-year or 18-year-old fast bowler that you know, if you really groom them, they are medium fast, and if they put on some more muscle, they can become a genuine fast bowler. Well, these medium fast bowlers, we stopped feeding them and they became weaker. So it moved from 9 to 3. And in the category above 4, it moved from 13 to 11. Now, because the category from above 4, this 11 sectors generated so much wealth, it was at times easy to misunderstand or to overlook what was going on with the other sectors, except when the oil and gas prices tumbled after 2015 and you needed other sectors to generate revenues, you started to look for what happened to these other sectors, and you started to weep and take a big rag and wipe your tears and whatnot, but that doesn't bring back the comparative advantage. At that point in time, you have lost the comparative advantage in these sectors, much like what has happened to West Indies cricket after Lara left. You know, we wondered what happened to Chandapal and Sawan and various things, etc. But they're not there. They are not there. Many gifted batsmen, many gifted, I often tell my class this, many gifted batsmen who came to the crease while Zara was there, started to practice hook shot, and you all probably know who I'm speaking about, started to wear bandana, and crashed, disappeared from Test cricket altogether. Probably, some of you all probably don't even hear about them again. They just disappeared. That is what happens when a batsman can make 501 run not out, or 400 runs. In the context of that looming talent and productivity, other sectors disappear. But when Lara leaves the crease, we are now in trouble. Trinidad and Tobago is certainly an economy at the brink of a lengthy period of structural adjustment. And in this environment, I sometimes clash, I often clash, I saw a few Trinidadians here, they could probably tell you all better than me. I often clash with the state in Trinidad on the management of the economy, in that I have recommended various things and they disagree. They sometimes call me an idiot. They're probably correct. So I have recommended a devaluation to push some of these other sectors forward, and they are greatly resistant to it. And which is understandable. People would not easily cut their standard of living by decreasing the value of their currency. But in the process of maintaining the currency at the level it is, our stock of international reserves has started to sharply decrease, and it has moved from around 13 billion to around 8 billion US in the last 3 years. And if we continue along, and we have also started to borrow to prop up the stock of international reserves to make the import cover ratio in Trinidad and Tobago look artificially good. So we are doing some tricky things, and it goes largely unnoticed until the idiot sometimes raises it. And it is a type of post-oil environment you find yourself in. And I say all of these things before I actually start to go into some detail to identify that there are two main players that benefit directly from the oil boom. The first is the company, of course, and the second main player is the state. So the state has a role to play, and the company has a role to play in helping the economy go forward in the presence of the things that oil do to an economy. And whilst, you know, whilst Bobby came up, he asked me, you know, say that Guyana is the economy, and it is correct in the Caribbean. Guyana is looked upon as the sexy economy, as the economy to where everything is happening. In the next 15 years, this country will benefit from an abundance of natural resource winds, and that is true. But oil is a very difficult commodity to manage. It is a very, very, very difficult commodity to manage. And so both the state has a role, the company has a role, but more importantly, you all here have an even bigger role. Civil society. The biggest watchdog on economic rents from the energy sector is civil society. And you all would have to think long and hard as to what role you all would play when you all leave here, and who would put the bell around the cat's neck in order to ensure that there is a great deal of transparency in the dealings in the oil sector. Because as we all know, I was looking at the Kaitian News Sunday papers, and on the front page, well, you all are Guyanese, you all would have seen that something about ExxonMobil and a deal in I think it's Equatorial Guinea. And things happen in the energy sector repeatedly. In fact, sometimes the same country, sometimes the same company, sometimes the same event. And civil society has an enormous role to play in guiding the transparency process forward. So this is what unfolds in terms of the structure of comparative advantage. And you all are hearing this, and you all are operating before the actual oil comes on stream, and eventually gas. And so you all have an adequate planning platform to prevent some of the things that you all would hear today from unfolding. And I would say this to you. Trinidad and Tobago also had a chance to prevent these things from happening. And in my view, and I say this all the time as a joke in the university, I often joke when I talk to my students, but they are serious jokes. In my view, we made a list of some of the errors not to commit as an oil-producing economy. We produced 8.4 billion barrels of oil and gas equivalent between 1999 and 2016. And then we proceeded to make every error. It happens. Somehow we proceeded to let the really effective exchange rate appreciate, to intervene in a nano-state on the labor market with 650,000 workers. The state entered the market and challenged the private sector for workers. The state embarked upon a program where basically on each day they spent all the oil resources extracted on that day. And all of these things are the opposite of what good practice theory will tell you. And they embarked on a pathway where we basically spent out all the energy sector resources as we received them. And so, whilst you all may say, and I wish you all the best, that it will not happen in Guyana, and I believe you all when you say that, the Trinidad and Tobago institutional position from a governance perspective was much stronger in 1999 when the LNG boom started than Guyana is today before their boom. But even so, I believe you all when you say that you all would prevent it, and I will be watching and listening to see. This year is what happens in economies all over the world with energy resources. The real effective exchange rate appreciates. That is simply a trade-weighted, inflation-moderated nominal exchange rate. And as it appreciates, the share of the manufacturing sector in total value added falls, which is what you do not want, but which characterizes the nature of oil-based economies. The manufacturing sector falls. And it goes largely unnoticed. To continue with the analogy, if Lara is making all these runs, and you see 702 for 3, West Indies, you'd love to see that now, I certainly would like to see it. For 702 runs for 3, then you can ignore that Sawan or any other batsman tried to play an irrational shot and left the crease for foolish reasons. You tend to overlook those things. You tend to overlook that one batsman made 500 out of the 700 runs, so that there is extreme concentration of productive activity in the hands of a few sectors. You tend to overlook those things. You tend to look at the 700 runs on the board. And so this happens in oil-based economy. This also happens in oil-based economies. The enrollment of women at secondary school level tend to fall. And as Paul Roma said in 1981, ideas leads to the growth of nation. human capital transformation is what triggers economic growth. And when your human capital fabric starts to be compromised by the production of particular type of commodities, you need to take measures up front to prevent that. You need to intervene accordingly and try to prevent that type of transformation of your economy. And this here is where Guyana is located, in a sense, at the point T0, T1 will be approximately 2020 for oil and 2023 for gas. The rectangular area associated with T1 and T3 is the revenues that it would fetch from oil and gas collectively. But that rectangular area, the distance from T1 to T3, is not really known. It depends upon how the play beneath the ground, beneath the ocean unfolds as they start to extract. The height of it also depends upon many factors: OPEC decisions, the volatility of oil price market, whether or not European decisions to move completely onto electric cars in a few years' time comes on stream. It depends on many things, many factors. And so the area of that rectangle is very difficult to predict. And the dashed lines show various options available to the Guyanese economy. The bird in hand approach to expenditure simply follows the Norwegian strategy of taking all the resources and putting it in a fund, and only when you know how much money you have, then you carve out a strategy to spend. The permanent income hypothesis requires estimating the revenue up front and then taking a consistent long-term share of this revenue and spending. And then you have an optimal strategy that involves a balance between savings and spending on infrastructure. And then you have the DRR, which I call the resource curse argument, which is the type of strategy trying to be followed, in which you foolishly spend all the resources in a manner unrelated to the rectangular block, and as we are today, end up in debt and mountain debt, which I know is not the route that Guyana would be taking. In the past, so just to read some comments here for you all, in the past, ownership of vast amount of natural resources was looked upon as the might and depth of a nation. This was reflected in the many wars fought over territorial rights, including wars fought over the Caribbean territories. With time, it became evident that more than natural resource abundance was required for growth. And the literature strongly supports this. Indeed, along these lines, former Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, noted, I thought then that wealth depended mainly on the possession of territory and natural resources, whether fertile land or valuable minerals or oil and gas. It was only after I had been in office for some years that I recognized that the decisive factors were the people, their natural abilities, education, and training. And this is from the Prime Minister of one of the Asian tigers, someone who was able to take a small economy, a tiny economy, and transform it to number one on the logistics performance indicator and make it into a first world economy with first world level per capita GDP. And he realized that the most valuable asset was the people, not the natural resources. That is a complementary factor of production. From another perspective, and this is almost the inverse argument, Juan Pablo Perez Alfonso, Venezuelan co-founder of OPEC 1975, noted, you think we are lucky? I don't think so. We are dying of indigestion. I call petroleum the devil's excrement. It brings trouble. Look around you. Look at this locura. Waste, corruption, consumption, our public services falling apart, and debt. Debt we shall have for years. We are putting our grandchildren in debt. And this from one of the founding fathers of OPEC. Oil, and look at Venezuela today. It has lived up to the expectations of one of the founding fathers. And many oil-based economies find themselves in this position. Should firms practice corporate social responsibility in resource-abundant countries? CSR fails in many petroleum-based communities as firms tend to emphasize the quick wins and low-hanging fruits and tend to support very visible events. One of the things that you all want to do is do not take handout from the multinational companies. Do not practice taking hampers for Christmas as a substitute for school bags for kids. Do not practice taking funding for a carnival pageant or a carnival costume in exchange for school books or funding libraries in the rural schools. Do not engage those type of easy, visible, quick win practices. They do not give long-term sustainable benefits. Indeed, the true acid test of a production function maintaining long-term viability is when you change one of the factor inputs into the production function, in this case capital. Oil is non-reproducible capital. In order for the output from the production function to remain the same, you have to replace it with reproducible capital. So replace the oil with human capital formation of one form or the other. And this is where many communities have gone wrong all over the world. And I will use some Trinidad and Tobago data shortly, but all around the world, many communities take quick wins, low-hanging fruits. We, at the university, just completed the biggest private sector intervention that the university received from the private sector. It was funded by a major multinational company and supported by the Inter-American Development Bank, a 5-year project in Trinidad. And we often clashed with the company. It was a very difficult process because the company they keep using, let us have a buzz in the community, let us have a big bang in the community, let us have a big event in the community. And we kept trying to say to them, to engineer long-term socio-economic reform, we need to go back to the primary school level and fix the flow of human capital. And they wanted people to see that they were doing glossy, pretty things, much like when Columbus came with pieces of glass. And it is something that we have to carefully look at as we move forward. Quick wins are not the type of interventions that would help rural schools in Guyana produce students with 5 O-levels or A-levels and to move on to different type of skills. You want sound, solid interventions from a human capital perspective. Regarding the host community itself, in order to properly tackle the resource curse at the community level, one source notes that local communities need to obtain a meaningful and informed position in the consultation processes. At the negotiation table and in the monitoring panels, national legislation and regulation should support this. Donors should make funding available to train and advise communities and wider civil society and assure that they are better organized and connected. This is the most sustainable solution to the resource curse. And I saw the University of Guyana today lead a green economy this seminar under Thomas Singh, and I think that was an excellent seminar in the right type of direction, trying to get the civil society groups going, because without civil society, in the context of weak governance, the economic rents that you all need from the energy sector can very quickly disappear. Very, very quickly disappear. I remember in 2005, the president of Nigeria just died, and his wife was leaving the country with 25 suitcases filled with $5 million US. The rents can quickly disappear through various avenues. One source noted that while claims about various community development efforts embarked upon as part of the company's corporate social responsibilities undeniable, the findings, however, show the need for Chevron Nigeria Limited to carry out a reappraisal of a community development. So here it is, I am making a quote from a study that was done in Nigeria in relation to a multinational Chevron. And it says to a reappraisal of a community development efforts in the host communities in order to ensure that only projects that are directly relevant to the needs of the host communities are embarked upon as part of the company's CSR effort. It could be necessary also for Chevron to adopt a bottom-up approach. And this is something that the people of Guyana need to take very seriously. Top-down, trickle-down approach from people in the multinational companies sitting in London or in New York, unaware, uninvolved with the fine culture of the host community will never work. You need grassroots bottom-up development. The World Bank has switched its strategy of economic development away from a trickle-down towards a localized economic development strategy starting from the grassroots level, using the indigenous factors of production from the community and building upwards. And it has worked well in many communities. And people of Guyana need to take that type of reasoning on board. It could be necessary also for Chevron to adopt a bottom-up approach in its community development drives. This will ensure proper investigation into the relevant needs of the community, build local capacity, enhance confidence, build social capital, and stimulate growth of the local economy. You want things that could build capital in one form or the other: physical capital, infrastructural capital, social capital, and perhaps most importantly, human capital. At every turn, emphasize human capital because it is the engine for economic transformation in small economies as ours. Another quote here. One source noted that ExxonMobil, in a desperate bid to silence its host community, and this is not about ExxonMobil, this is a quote. I am writing a book actually on this, so I collected some of these things. In a desperate bid to silence its host communities, has awarded bogus contracts to Chief Edith Nadaraki, a paramount ruler in one of the communities in Albino local government ravaged by its recent oil spills arising from the obsolete facilities of the oil firm. ExxonMobil officials violated the company's rigorous contracting procedures and awarded the cleanup to their collaborators, who have no expertise either in oil spill management or in cleaning up, with the objective of compromising them and silencing protesting indigents in the area. Part of their brief is to ensure that the agitation for cash compensation to fishermen is silenced. And that will not necessarily happen in Guyana, but you all need to always be aware when dealing with multinational companies for transparency. And again, it comes back to civil society. And if you have civil society leaders who take hush money and buy out, then the economic rents again will just disappear. The stronger the civil society movement and the stronger the civil society group is, the greater the value of corporate social responsibility from a company working through the civil society entity. The Parents Teachers Association, the churches, the community groups have to rise up now, because the type of resource wealth Guyana will likely experience would be much greater than it realized in the past. And so you all have to make wise use of these resource wealth. And I say this openly. The natural gas and oil is owned by the people of Guyana. And whilst from a financial perspective, someone in London and in New York and in Toronto could drive an Audi and a BMW and a Mercedes based on your oil and your gas, that is okay. That is the way the financial matters work. At the same point in time, you all cannot be so foolish as to not extract or get your fair share of the economic rents for the development of your own community. That would be your fault. That will not be the multinational fault. You all know the facts. You all can lobby for your fair share, and if you do not do it, do not blame the multinationals for just extracting it and driving their Audis elsewhere or BMWs. In the past, settlements between local communities and extractive companies focus on access to land and the associated compensation package. With time, communities have grown more confident and competent and have placed demands for local content, employment with associated gender ratios, and regular stakeholder consultation meetings. In this regard, one source noted that delivering local benefits in the communities where extractive industries operate is no longer a choice. It is a commercial necessity, and one that is increasingly mandated by law. In the new competitive landscape of waning supply and increasing demand for energy and mineral resources, companies in the extractive industries face rising expectations to do more than simply mitigate negative impacts, serve as sources of tax royalty revenue, and act as good neighbors. They need to do more than that. They need to start to replace the extracted non-reproducible capital with reproducible capital so that the viability of this production function could go well into the future, almost indefinitely into the future. Now, this here simply explains that if it is you have 100 people in the country and you have 5 people working in the oil sector, this is 2017, so this is Guyana. Let us assume the energy sector in Guyana, as composed, as it stands, employs 5 people. The manufacturing and agricultural sector and ecotourism sector employs 10 people. So that is 5 and 10, 15. And the services sector employs 85 people. Now, with the oil boom, what would happen? People would leave the services sector and try to go and work in the oil sector where the salary is 4, 5, 6, 7 times. People would leave the manufacturing and agricultural and ecotourism sector and try to go and work in the oil sector where the salary is considerably more. As the oil sector generates more wealth, it is going to need more factors of production. So it is going to increase wages to attract the best engineers, best accountants, best lawyers, and of course the best economists to come and work for them. So the salaries of these professionals would rise. But the manufacturing sector and the agricultural sector and the ecotourism sector, the export sectors, in order to preserve a certain amount of employment of skilled people, would commensurately have to raise salaries. So the salaries would rise there, and it would also rise in the services sector. So you now have an economy with a generally higher wage rate. This does not pose a problem as long as the current account balance and the fiscal balance in the economy motivated by improved energy sector revenues is buoyant. So no love lost, everybody gets a higher wages, the price level in the economy rise, the non-energy sector exports fall, and there's a redistribution in employment in the economy. Employment in the energy sector, for example, may move from 5 to 8. Employment in the manufacturing and agriculture and ecotourism sector may move from 10 to 6. So that 6 and 8 is 14. It may move from 5, I am forgetting my numbers, 5, 10, and 85, that is 100. So employment in the energy sector would move to 8. Employment in the manufacturing and agricultural sector would move from 10 down to 6. So 6 and 8 is 14, and in the services sector it would increase to 86. Now, so the services sector would expand, the manufacturing, agriculture, and ecotourism sector would contract, and the petroleum sector would expand. So the rise in the petroleum sector is good. You would have an elitist group developing in this society because some people move into this more lucrative sector. The manufacturing, agriculture, and ecotourism sector poses a problem because these are the Chandapals and the Sawans that you expect to make runs or to generate scarce foreign exchange in the event that the Brian Lara or the energy sector fails. But because this has now fallen in terms of employment from 10 to around 6, that creates an issue. You no longer have the type of factors of production in this sector to keep it viable. And as we saw in the Trinidad and Tobago economy case, the number of areas with comparative advantage as a consequence falls because there's lost workers. The services sector in turn expands. And for those of you all who have visited Trinidad and Tobago in the last 5 years, you would see Movie Town, Price Mart, Massy Stores, and a host of massive malls that just kept expanding. In fact, we made the dangerous technical error. And again, one government minister called me an idiot for saying this. And he was probably correct, we made the dangerous technical error of calling diversification an increase in production in the services sector via the expansion in the number of malls. Whereas the type of diversification that Guyana needs and Trinidad and Tobago needed is into sectors that generate foreign exchange. So when you move into diversification in the services sector via an expansion in the number of malls, you create foreign exchange guzzlers. These companies, Massy Stores, Price Mart, they use an enormous amount of foreign exchange on a daily basis. And as a consequence, our current account balance has in fact moved into deficit in Trinidad and Tobago. It was artificially buoyed up for many years by price of oil and price of gas. And now that those two products have experienced a decline in price, our current account balance, which was the only Caribbean economy with a favorable current account balance, has now also gone into deficit. So The expanded services sector is a problem in the context that it uses a lot of foreign exchange. It is a problem in the context that it has a lower productivity on average than the manufacturing, export, agriculture, and ecotourism sector and the petroleum sector. So, a number of structural problems emerges in the economy on account of oil production, and I want to repeat that. A number of deep-rooted structural problems enter into the economy on account of the production of oil. And it is therefore my view that the people to fix the structural problems that emerge in the economy on account of oil is the people that produce oil, which in this case I am treating as one entity. I am treated as the state and as the company. So the state has a role to play and the company has a role to play in breaking back down the problems that emerge in the economy from a structural perspective on account of the startup of production. So this just here explains the rise in the size of the petroleum sector, the rise in the size of the service sector, but most importantly, the contraction in the size of the manufacturing, export, agriculture, and any tourism export product that you all have. Even more extractive industries founded on natural resources must carry some remedial responsibility when their extractive activities adversely impact on both the short-run and long-run capacity of the host community to sustain itself. One source notes that the oil companies therefore in turn have the duty to counteract this effect, particularly if they have the capability to do so. And this is why we are turning to the oil companies. We have to turn with players with deep pockets to initiate change. A small entity, a small private sector firm cannot initiate the type of change that we want. It is either the state or the company. The oil company's responsibility therefore increases when the exploitation of oil leads to a reduction of a country's capital stock, including human capital. This is a powerful statement for CSR to maintain the Hartwick Rule principle. And I said before, the Hartwick Rule principle founded on the work of George Hartwick in 1977 simply states that if you extract non-reproducible capital, replace it with reproducible capital. Relatedly, Blofield and Finance 2005 stated, cutting across this absence of a structural understanding and an inability or unwillingness to consider causality. Thus, for instance, poverty is presented as a regrettable fact rather than a consequence of any causal conditions and events. And look at some of the oil-producing economies in the world. They are some of the poorest regions in the world. And so there is a causal aspect involved here, but it is presented as a regrettable fact. Civil society has a role. I know that you all are about or have started the EITI program. That is one avenue that would help with transparency, but that is 5% of the task. The next 95% is with you all, civil society. Civil society has the greatest role to play as the watchdog of the country's economic rights. So in Mayaro, a part of Trinidad and Tobago in the southeast, we were able to lobby a multinational company, BPTT, which responded by giving a loan for 7.2 million. The loan was designed to bridge the gap between the small enterprise need for finance and the absence of traditional sources of funding. By July 2017, MyPed, which is the name of the small enterprise company, have distributed more than 80 million in loans. The strength of MyPed is that it offers training and advice to local entrepreneurs. So MyPed wasn't just a small loan arrangement. It also taught the entrepreneurs about basic tax training and offer them advice on how to go about conducting a business so that the probability of failure was lowered. Over 2,000 permanent and 4,000 temporary jobs have been created. And again, this is the power of civil society, academia, the media, and small groups in the Mayaro community came together and aggressively lobbied the multinational company until we got this. And we didn't stop until we got the small loan arrangement, and it has worked really well. In fact, MyPed recently won an international award for best practice in the field. And it is something that the Guyanese people want to consider right up front. Right up front. If it is that naturally, because of the economics associated with oil production, the manufacturing sector contracts, the export agriculture sector contracts, and the ecotourism and other tourism export products contract, then right up front you look for a microfinancing arrangement that could counterbalance this contraction and provide soft loans and small loans under appropriate conditions to help rebalance these companies so that they do not decrease. You do not want these other exporting sectors to decrease at all. In fact, one of the things you want to do is to push agriculture. You want to use the oil rents to help drive the agricultural and diversification process so that you maintain export revenues in these other sectors. Now, this year is the performance of school in St. Patrick and southeastern Trinidad. St. Patrick is the area where all the liquefied natural gas is produced, and the southeast of Trinidad is where most of the crude oil is produced. So I'm comparing SCA results here. Mathematics for 2012 in St. Patrick, 67.1. In southeastern, 65.7, less than the national average. Language arts, less than the national average. Creative writing, both less than the national average. Again, mathematics, less than the national average. Language arts, both less than the national average. And creative writing in southeastern, less than the national average. So in these resources and these economies generate billions of dollars. They generated billions of dollars. And yet still their performance was the worst in the country. And this is the disaster that remains after oil goes and natural gas goes. Your human capital fabric, which is the engine for economic transformation and for ideas transformation, goes. And therefore the counterbalancing solution is to get corporate social responsibility involved in smoothing out this problem before, in a well-defined, well-organized intervention founded on a baseline. See, one of the things that we found in Trinidad, apart from BPTT, which I must confess follows a reasonable amount of good practice methodology, many of the other companies made ad hoc reactive interventions. So, a child get kidnapped, they come in that school and they do something. 2 children missing for 3 days, they come in that school and they do something. Rather than have a well-defined, organized baseline that tells you what are the literacy gaps, where students are located, where we have pupil-to-teacher ratio problems, where we have problems with lessons at the end of the day, the number of problems that can emerge with primary school education in particular, and then intervene to troubleshoot them. Instead, some of these companies, what they focused on was building swimming pools and things like that. That is good and lovely, and we will take it in the community, thank you, comma. We want human capital formation to transform the economies. And it is not only in primary school performance, in secondary school performance, these schools provide significantly less than some of the average other schools in the economy. So again, an appropriate response of CSR is microfinancing and the Hartwick rule, focus on human capital formation. And via the microfinancing arrangement, you can nurture and push the diversification of the economy in the segments of the economy that could generate scarce foreign exchange, but that will be compromised by a boom in the energy sector. The MNC sector involved in the energy sector in Guyana has to pay particular attention that consultation is not superficial and inadequate. One of the things we found is that, certainly as regards the fishermen, some of the companies, they tried to engage the fishermen and did not use an appropriate methodology for compensation founded on good practice scientific intervention. And the consultation with the fishermen were mainly with the loudest speaking fishermen, so that they would employ sometimes the loudest speaking fisherman or fisherfolk and take them on board, and in so doing, the group will become weaker and therefore less able to negotiate. I saw situations where the counselor in the community, the loudest, most speaking, most aggressive community member would now become employed by the community, and therefore the agitation of the community and the needs of the community would consequently fall by the way. In designing its CSR strategy, the country has to focus on vulnerable groups in society, such as the elderly, poor, women and children. The company has to build relationships with civil society groups. And I keep emphasizing the importance of civil society groups. The CSR program must proactively address the possibility of an unplanned event with a view to reducing the potential divergence of private and social costs and making companies internalize the external cost of their particular economic activity. And so, I think right up front, CSR has to be built into the cost structure of the company. The company has to understand, the companies, has to understand that they have a responsibility to the community, not by choice, but because good practice, Dutch disease economic theory, indicates in a clear, robust, accurate, scientific way that the non-booming tradable segments of the economy would be compromised in the presence of a rise in energy sector production and the attendant events that follow. And this here is some comments in relation to the Guyanese economy. I am very dependent on my colleague Thomas Singh from UG for this segment. Appropriate corporate social responsibility options will have to consider the fact that residents of the Barima, Waini, and Pomeroon Supernam regions are lagging behind other regions in the country in a number of indicators of socio-economic well-being. So in the paper that we are doing, we had some data and we found that in these communities, the literacy rates, the debt rate, and a number of the other social indicators lag behind the rest of the economy. In the Santa Rosa mission, it might be possible to help the Amerindian community to promote sustainable timber harvesting and ecotourism beyond what is now occurring. In the case of charity, it may be possible to work with rice farmers who have been facing serious agricultural and marketing problems to diversify into different activities. And CSR activities of this sort would enhance the productivity of people living in those regions and increase their income earning capacity, thereby avoiding the risk of making them dependent on CSR inflows into the communities. This here is very, very, very preliminary material. What the University of the West Indies and the University of Guyana in a joint effort has started to do is to look at some of the regions that we think in the event of an oil spill or otherwise, and because of an increase in oil production and gas production that would come, what are some of the problems that they would realize, and what are some of the appropriate, scientifically determined ways to help to reduce the magnitude of these problems. And part of the solution, we are saying, must lie with the state. The state will have primary responsibility for many things. Part of the solution, however, must lie with the company for these various communities. And the third group, which we leave to you all, and which is perhaps the most important group, is civil society. The oil and gas resources are that of the people, and you all have to therefore be the watchdog for the use of the revenues from the oil and gas sector. And it is therefore up to you all to mobilize and to bring your queries and to use your voices as one to ensure that decisions and actions take place in a manner and form consistent with your view of where you would like to see Guyana be in the medium-term period. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hussein, for bringing us to a level where I think we understand corporate social responsibility in the context of the oil and gas sector a little bit more and its impact on an economy like Guyana. Your emphasis was on the human resources of a country when it relates, as it relates to corporate social responsibility on overall development of an economy. And I think we can now change the term CSR from corporate social responsibility to perhaps civil society reporting. So I think your emphasis was on that there must be a greater role for civil society as it relates to the operation of these companies in resource-abundant countries like us. We will now open the floor. There should be 2 microphones, so questions are open and directed to Dr. Hussein.
Now, I just want to right away bring to the fore kind of the elephant in the room in not only economy, a political economy like Guyana's. which is that civil society, of course, has a very important role to play, as you note, in terms of keeping the government on its feet. However, in Guyana, we also have the issue of national unity as something we have to deepen. And so, especially from your experiences in Trinidad, what would you say about the fact that what we have to do in Guyana too is to get a national approach so that civil society could be united in its efforts to keep the government on its toes in terms of proper use of the potential resources from oil and gas. Guyana is a society that is fractured, and we have to face the fact that in trying to ensure that the oil and gas resources are used to the benefit of all Guyana, that we find a way for civil society to get beyond the racial chasms in the country. Thank you.
In Trinidad, like this guy over here, this man, would have said that the problems of national unity, or at least political problems in Guyana, and compare it to the political problems in Trinidad. But in Guyana, the political problems do affect the private sector, do affect civil society. And also, we can see how it affects sugar, as what this administration has been doing to sugar. And we see how it ignores sugar, and it allows a social problem that will affect Guyana. So we looking at sugar now with oil. There is a political problem again that arises with oil. That there is the transparency that you mentioned earlier. We cannot see, the civil society, we cannot see the contract that is being produced by government, between government and the oil sector. And that is very important if we want to form the, we call it the CRC program. If you want to form that, we need to know the contract. So that is important, and I want to know what is your take on it. Thank you very much.
In terms of the first question, although both questions had an element of similarity, in terms of the first question, Trinidad and Tobago did very badly from a civil society perspective. In fact, I think the state used the energy rents to buy out civil society groups once they agitated and kept them quiet. What we found worked best with hindsight is the unions that remain committed to their cause, is the business chambers that remains committed to their cause, and the religious groups that remains committed to their cause. And even in ethnic fracturized societies with more than one ethnic group, as is Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, you find that within the well-defined groups like the chambers and the unions and the religious groups, that they remain strongly bonded because there is an adequate bonding factor. And so perhaps the way forward for Guyana is to lobby through these agencies, to lobby through their chambers, to lobby through their unions, to lobby through their religious groups to get change done. What you find is that if you go as small groups, nobody pays attention to you. Nobody pays attention to you. So you would have to go through these other more well-defined groups, unless it is you can build a strong civil society group within your community across the ethnic divide, which, just as they say, travels very slowly across some divisions. And so it may be in your best interest to go the route of the established civil society groups that has withstood the test even of an ethnically divided state. In terms of the contract, I am not sure how to answer that. I mean, I think that in 2017 people should be allowed to see the contract. It is your resources, and although you have an agent, which is the state acting on your behalf for a period of time, the agent should be instructed by the stakeholders, which is yourself, to share the various documents that they engage on your behalf with you all. Certainly in Trinidad and Tobago, when we wanted to see various contracts with the multinationals, we used the Freedom of Information Act and we got to see it. So maybe Guyana may have to go a route of a Freedom of Information Act to get things done. I do not know if it exists here, but I'm just using the example of Trinidad and Tobago. And also with relation to agriculture, one of the things that oil offers is two clear opportunities. Oil offers two clear opportunities for the agricultural sector. One is resources for hush money, or two, resources for transformation. Resources for hush money. Our sugar sector, in 1975, when the state took over State and Lyle Company in Trinidad and Tobago, we offered the workers a 100% increase in salary. In 1980, some people in the sugarcane sector agitated again and we offered them another 100% increase in salary. So in the space of 1975 to 1980, they had 2 rounds of 100% increases in salary. And so the sector became very uncompetitive, and by 1989, 1990, plans were embarked upon to close down the sugar sector in Trinidad and Tobago. What I think is available, and interestingly, just today I was having some discussion with a couple of people about the agricultural sector in Trinidad and Tobago. One of the things that you all need to consider is the use of more modern technology, perhaps influenced by the oil rents, to help create transformation in the agricultural sector. But be very careful about your agricultural sector in the context of energy sector rents, because if left unattended to, the natural tendency is for de-agriculturalization. Trinidad and Tobago agricultural employment moved from 56,000 people in 1991 to 2016 it moved to 21,000 people. And we sat down and watched as this de-agriculturalization took place. We always speak in Trinidad and Tobago about world-class cocoa, and we have been saying that for the last 120 years. And it still remains world-class cocoa that is unattended to. So, you all need to be very careful about that. I am not sure if I answered your question entirely correctly. I cannot say more about the contract, but I just related it to the Freedom of Information Act in Trinidad and Tobago.
Good evening, Dr. Hussain. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, very informative, as per norm. I'd just like to ask 2 very quick questions. They're not directly related to corporate social responsibility, but rather they're tangential, but I believe you have the capacity to answer. The first one, I'm glad you mentioned structural transformation, issues related to economic structure. We know that Guyana has been a country which has been struggling in terms of structural transformation. One of the things which we have had experiences with, however, is an extractive sector very early on in our economic development story. That's the sector of gold. And it's really hampered our agricultural development. Do you see oil is an industry operating much like the gold sector in Guyana? If you're familiar with it, of course, you can answer that. The second one, it's on a more public financial management note. How do we account, or how would you advise government of Guyana to move forward in accounting for contingent liabilities which may occur relative to or in relation to the oil industry? How do you see Guyana accounting for this obvious contingent liability related to the oil sector?
Evan Prasad, University of Guyana. Dr. Hussain, listening to you on corporate social responsibility, these are very powerful words, because in the history of the extractive sector in Guyana, we've had a minimal CSR. We've had 101 years of bauxite production in Linden, and there's nothing to show really after 101 years. There's Ras, I'll get you over here, who can back me up. We've had we got a hole in the ground. 3.8 million ounces of gold disappeared. And now we have the big giant coming here, oil. In Trinidad, How many benefits? What was the quantum of the benefits over 180 years of oil gas production of the CSR in Trinidad? What do you really get there? Thank you.
One of the things that Guyana needs to bear in mind is without oil, the Guyanese economy has been growing and has been doing reasonably well. They have a decent, good performance in the last 12 years. And although you all continue to run persistent current account and fiscal imbalances, oil is much, much worse than gold in terms of the impact it has on consumer behavior. But it really depends upon the way it is managed. You know, again, going back to cricket, I often make this joke with my class. I had ambitions to play for West Indies cricket, and that didn't work out well. I played once against Lara, and that didn't work out well either. But one of the things I can remember is in 1989, Augustine Logie was the captain, was the manager of the Trinidad and Tobago cricket team, and Lara was a young boy, and he had a dispute with Logie in the dressing room, and he allegedly, and the key word is allegedly to protect myself, took the bat and raised it to hit Logie. And it is something that remained with me. I was a young aspiring, by that time my aspirations were mostly done, but I still had some very amount of hope. And then sometime later I remember him walking on the field with a cell phone. And I say those two things not in relation to Lara specifically, because many other sports people do these things. I say those two things in reference to it is the management of the booming factor that really matters. If it is properly managed, as in Botswana, where diamonds has been used to transform the economy, or as in Norway, where they were able to build up a fund of $1 trillion and use 4% of the interest on the fund in any 1 year for budgetary purposes, it has worked well. So people have demonstrated that these resources could be managed and economies could do well. A similar story could perhaps be said about Canada, but Botswana is a developing country, so I said that first. Simply because in Trinidad and Tobago, our average propensity to import moved from about 19 cents in $1 in 1991 to 48 cents in a dollar in 2017. So we became very, very dependent on imports as per capita GDP increased in Trinidad and Tobago, and it has created serious current account implications. And the Guyanese economy need to be wary of that. And you mentioned at first structural adjustment. If your building has a structural problem, a problem with the foundation, you cannot just paint it and put some water on it. You have to take your time and go into the engineering and ensure that you make interventions that would protect the long-term structure. And it's the same thing with the Guyanese economy. The structural adjustment here requires that you all manage this oil in a manner and form that does not allow it to contribute rapidly to average propensity to import, that does not contribute rapidly to escalated fiscal expenditures, that does not allow it to contribute rapidly to increase government consumption via transfers and subsidies, that does not allow it to contribute rapidly to a declining share of capital investment in the economy. All those things are structural in nature when considered over a period of time, and the Guyanese people have to be very careful about that. In some sense, given the governance indicators in Guyana, one could be forgiven for saying, take all the extracted resources and put it in a fund, and only use the resources from the fund until the governance indicators cross some well-defined, accepted threshold level. Because if they do not cross that threshold level, then sometimes you almost sign on to contracts with 2% royalties and no taxes, or you all may even sign on to contracts and the signature bonus could disappear. So it is important to ensure that the governance indicators and the procurement policies in Guyana reach adequate level. And in the interim, Guyana has been growing fairly well. Guyana has one of the best growth performance in CARICOM in the recent past, and it will continue to do so in the medium-term period, now spurred on more by oil. And therefore, whilst it is good to bring the oil from below the ground, above the ground, be careful that in reallocating wealth, you do not count the reallocated wealth as growth, which we did in Trinidad and Tobago. We change the intercept of economic activity, but in so doing, the growth of economic activity turned negative. And that is in response to the structural adjustment comment. One of the things that we did in Trinidad and Tobago, and we did fairly well, is we introduced an environmental tax. And so it has quite a few billions in it, and we use money from that for fast action intervention in the event of an oil spill, where you do not need to be writing the company or any entity and calling for funds. You have a quick pool of resources that you can draw down on in the event of those type of activities. And again, in terms of CSR in Trinidad and Tobago, we have had a bad track record. One of the things I would say is if Trinidad and Tobago were to grow at the same pace of Antigua and Barbuda that does not have oil from 1981 to 2017, in 2017 we would have a much higher GDP than we have now, even having produced 8.4 billion barrels of oil and gas equivalent. That does not mean that Guyana should not extract its oil. It means that it is the management of the extracted oil revenues that really conditions the pace at which the economy grows. And if the management is poor, then the extracted oil revenues can move from a resource blessing to what typically occurs in developing economies, a resource curse.
Dr. Hussain, another wonderful presentation. My name is Annette Arjun Martins, and I'm the president of the Guyana Marine Conservation Society. The bush cow in the room is that we can't hold government or ExxonMobil or oil accountable unless we have access to the contracts and other documentation. And I hope that we can actually get access to information sooner rather than later. In the meanwhile as well, too, you sort of preempted one of the questions I was going to ask, because there's been very little focus on the environment so far, and I'm glad that GOGA has had this CSR workshop, so hopefully maybe we're working up towards an environmental one. And I wanted to ask specifically what mechanisms we could look at in terms of, heaven forbid, an oil spill. Because I'm glad that Thomas as well recommended Region 1 and 2 as some of the sensitive areas to look at, because, for example, Region 1 is where the Shell Beach Protected Area, very rich biodiversity, very abundant indigenous population, and the fishing industry occurs. And of course, we know that it's a very fragile ecosystem that will be horrendously impacted because the currents go pretty close to the Shell Beach area as well as the Orinoco Delta. So you mentioned the environmental tax that you had in Trinidad, and I would like to ask you to expand a bit on it. So for example, how is it quantified as to what the environmental damage might have been? Where does the revenues go to? Does it go into the consolidated fund and it could vanish, or does it go into a specific fund that is there? If you could just relate to that a bit. And also to just end and sharing with you that the Guyana Marine Conservation Society has 2 interns from the University of Toronto who's been here for 3 months. Bobby, thank you for facilitating them several times. And we'd be very willing to share our report with you as well on some of the work they've been doing in Region 1. Thank you.
Good evening all. Dr. Hussain, welcome again. Congratulations to all this good presentation. My question to you is, at what point should the CSR be introduced in the oil and gas industry? In the development of a country's oil and gas industry? And at what point should civil society pay the interest and should be transparent in the development of a country's oil and gas industry? And could you also give us some of the, what I may say, your advice in respect of, in our country, in getting civil society as a one body when you have political polarity as we have in this country.
In terms of the environment question, one of the things I think you all should consider doing in Guyana is inviting the EMA from Trinidad, the Environmental Management Agency, they have a reasonably well-working model in Trinidad. We attend to the oil spills fairly quickly, and so perhaps it would make sense looking at the structure of our model, because I think this is one of the things in the energy sector that works well. I think it is 0.2% of profits from the energy companies that goes into a specific environmental fund that is overseen by the line minister. I think it's the Minister of Energy that oversees it. But that fund is for use for environmental related matters, environmental related disasters such as an oil spill, and it has been used many times in the past in the process of oil spills. At which point should CSR be introduced? CSR has to start immediately. Even in the absence of oil, there is value in civil society coming together in a community to enrich the community. It just becomes more accentuated in the presence of oil, but even in the absence of oil, there is always much to be gained by collaboration and by community groups working together for various issues. The polarization question came up earlier in terms of an ethnically fractured society. What I would say is work through the groups that currently work well, your unions, your chambers of commerce. Those are groups that have worked well in the past and continue to work with them, but that does not prevent a group, say in Region 1 or Region 2, from coming together and actually forming an alliance in relation to the startup of oil production for the needs of the community. And my view on it is that you all would have to have a common cause. If you all have an adequate common cause, you all will have to rise up above the petty insularity as I see it. Certainly, it will depend heavily on the leadership structure as with everything else. If the leaders rise above these type of thinking, then those that follow these people will also rise up above it. Now, I know that is easier said than done in societies like Trinidad and societies like Guyana, and hence my first line of approach would be to go through institutions that has withstood the test of time, and therefore those institutions would not have been broken down by the ethnic problem. So if the chambers have been here for 20, 25 years, work through them and as an arm of them. If it is the unions have been here for a long period of time, work through them and as an arm of them. But it does not mean that other groups cannot rise up. You just have to deal with the issues as you all go along.
The CSR question is reference to the time of development specifically to the oil and gas industry. Because you're only hearing about oil and gas if you're on the brink of production. What before the production? What about the time of the awarding of the exploration block? There's nothing being said about that, and we don't know how exploration blocks are being awarded, and if any CSR factor is factored into that exercise. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Dr. Hussein, very good presentation. My name is Lisa Hussein. I am a third year economics major at the University of Guyana. My question is in relation to your presentation. I will probably ask you a question after. No problem. My question is in relation to your presentation. I was interested to know how did you validate the causation? I may be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. The validation of low school grades with the oil producing areas. How did you validate that causation?
The company's main goal is to operate in a profitable manner so as to satisfy its investors and its stockholders. The state responsibility is to ensure that the company operates in a manner that will provide additional taxes to the state, but also should ensure that the civil society interest is recognized and fostered. How will the civil society operate in this environment? Obviously, there will be conflict between the civil society, the state, and the company. Could the civil society be strong enough to sustain the culpability of these two main players, especially if it's not properly financed?
The question in relation to exploration blocks. See, CSR can start at any point in time. It really depends upon when the civil society groups come together, which is a function of quite a number of factors, including the level of maturity of a society in various ways. Now, in some, I could well imagine in a more advanced economy where civil society groups have a longer history, that from the very stage of the allocation of contracts that civil society groups would lobby the company for various CSR interventions. I can imagine that scenario unfolding. I can also imagine in the extreme version where we are dealing with a newly independent economy, where the level of literacy is very low, that civil society groups do not form at all, or form at the very end when production is probably almost, when all the oil and gas is probably almost completely extracted. And then you have the intermediate case where most countries, including Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, would fall, where we are not the most advanced nor the least advanced economy in terms of civil society movements, but where we have some history. Again, it will depend upon personalities and the individuals involved and the objective of the groups coming together. So if it is for is conservation, the Guyana Marine, if it is groups like, and I meet, is Ms. Arjun, and in most of the forums I come to in Guyana, and there's another gentleman, I didn't see him here tonight, he heads Transparency International. Yeah, it's a white guy, about 65 years old. Michael, yeah. Right. These two people stand out in my mind as people that agitate all the time for the Guyanese people in one way or the other. They are very involved and they are always pushing for transformation and change. And once you have personalities like that, things would get done. It just depends upon the players involved at any point in time, from the day that people start a conversation on oil in Guyana to the day the last barrel is produced. Anywhere along that spectrum of time, a civil society group could intervene. Now, I take a point on when to lobby for civil society, for corporate social responsibility resources. That would no doubt likely have to probably start when production actually starts, or when the multinational brings resources into the country and actually has a location here, headquarters here. So ExxonMobil, for example, is already here, and you all can have conversations with them about how to strengthen civil society groups from the communities that could be potentially affected in one way or the other. And it is the way that you all discuss and the quality of the conversations that will determine the extent of response by the company. But you all have to continuously build up your case for the relevant interventions that you want in the community, and keep pushing in one form or the other, keep pushing in one form or the other. In terms of the causality, we actually ran some, answering specifically the student here, we actually ran some block Granger causality tests to see what was the impact of oil rents in some community on unemployment, the enrollment of females, and poverty levels in those communities. And in each case, we found that as oil rents increased, we had an increase in unemployment, a decrease in the enrollment of females, and a rise in poverty. The causality is, in economic terms, that was in econometric terms. In economic terms, the causality operates as follows. With oil, there is a movement away from the non-booming tradable, or or the manufacturing, agriculture, export agriculture and tourism sector into the services sector. And so some of these areas here, as you saw with the Trinidad and Tobago comparative advantage numbers, some of these areas actually move out of productive activity because they lose workers, and the rising cost of wages, which I mentioned earlier, actually render some sectors unproductive, uncompetitive. And so you can therefore have an actual increase in unemployment. In reference to Trinidad and Tobago, and I see Guyana is probably going down that road, I could be wrong. Our sugar sector, for example, in the presence of our oil boom, had to retrench thousands of workers because of the rising wages in the economy on account of oil production, leading to the sugar sector being unable to compete in international markets. And we eventually closed down our entire sector, putting thousands of people unemployed, and for a period of time leading to a rise in the poverty levels. This is a classic principal agent problem in which each group involved has a different maximization problem to pursue. The state tries to maximize vote and tries to win the next election. The company tries to maximize profitability, and civil society tries to maximize the welfare of its membership and its community. At times, the interests of each group can be contested, they can be conflicting. But civil society has an even greater role to play as the watchdog of the first two groups to ensure that whilst the company is maximizing profitability, it does not do so at the expense of the community, and whilst the state is trying to maximize vote and increase the probability of winning the next election, it does not do so at the expense of the community. And so civil society has the strongest, perhaps overall role to play in conditioning the nature of CSR activity that the firm engages, because once you all agitate enough, the firm will have to react in the relevant way. But what happens in developing countries is that the civil, especially oil-abundant developing economies, is that the civil society groups remain constantly in the infancy stage. They never really go beyond the infancy stage, and they always take hush money. They are given some project to do, and that quiets the group, and they no longer participate in civil society action. And in small societies like Guyana with tiny populations, what happens is that the civil society groups and the political groups sometimes converge into one. And so you have to be very serious if you want to initiate transformation and structural change in your economy to de-link the civil society groups from the political groups in order to get meaningful action done.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hussain. I think you've given us, we've closed a round of questions. If you want, you can engage with Dr. Hussain after we finish. You've given us great ideas and thoughts as it relates to corporate social responsibility, but you've also highlighted the positives and negatives of the oil sector on an economy such as Guyana. A couple of points which we would walk away from is the importance of the human capital, the human resource of the country, the responsibility of the civil society, and the question which there are two questions which I will leave, but it could be answered in discourse, is how do we define corporate social responsibility in the context of the oil and gas industry that is emerging here in Guyana? And the other one is, Guyana is moving towards the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. How do we play an effective role by being accountable and transparent in corporate social responsibility forums with the oil companies and as well with the state as it relates to how will we be reporting on EITI, not only for the government and the companies, but also for civil society? So, Dr. Hussain, I think it is a great honor to have you here this evening and bring some light to us on corporate social responsibility as we look towards this emerging oil and gas industry. So, ladies and gentlemen, please allow us to thank Dr. Hussain once again for his presentation. In closing, GOGA would like to thank the audience, members of the diplomatic community, members of the executives of GOGA, Mr. Nigel Hughes is here with us, members of the public and private sector and the media. And please do look out for other activities which will be happening in the month of September, and GOGA will keep you informed. Thank you once again for supporting us.